What is going on, everyone? This is Andrew Wright from Drew Code Sports Talk, and I wanted to come on here real quick because we have a breaking story that just came out like 2 minutes ago. um, I just received it as I was dropping my kids off at school, and I am heading to work. But I wanted to hit on this right now. Adam Schefter has reported that Pete Carroll and the Raiders have come to a 3-year deal agreement for Pete Carroll to become the new head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. So, big news there. If I'm being honest, he was probably, out of all of the head coaching candidates out there, he was probably number 4 on my list. I'm not saying that I don't like him. For those who who know me personally, obviously I'm a big Fresno State fan, of course. I mean, I'm from Fresno. I mean, you're from Fresno, you're going to grow up a Fresno State fan. I mean, it's everywhere. But, um, I've always really loved and admired USC. Of course, I was kind of a bandwagoner when I was a little bit younger, when I was in high school. I saw Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, Lendell White type of USC teams, and I loved those teams. I thought those teams were amazing. Obviously, they were. But yeah, I was big fans of USC, and I've always just kept watching because they're always very interesting. They always have these really good NFL prospects. They've always had, and when Pete Carroll left, I was a little disappointed. But when he went to Seattle, I wasn't sure how he was going to do because when he was a head coach previously in the NFL before USC, he really struggled, and so I wasn't sure how he was going to do. And not only did he succeed, but he exceeded expectations. And so, he is a very talented head coach. He is a guy who is very knowledgeable of the game, but that's not the only thing. He is a very personable guy. Um, he's got a lot of good um, connections around the league. He's going to be able to find an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, like real easily. He's not going to struggle with that. And I do think that he could really do well with Spytek, the new general manager. So I think this is a good hire. I think this is a really good hire because Pete Carroll is very similar to Antonio Pierce when it comes to motivating teams. He's a good motivator, but he's also very knowledgeable of the game. He has a ton of head coaching experience, obviously. And so, this is a good fit. This is a good fit for the Raiders. This is a good fit for Pete Carroll. I love Pete Carroll. I think, you could argue that it's not, the down years in Seattle weren't necessarily his fault. You could say, well, the development wasn't really there, but a lot of their drafts were kind of whiffs towards the end, not really grabbing the best talent. And as soon as they were ready for a new regime, they started, getting better and better these past years. But one thing that I want to say is everyone keeps saying, well, Pete Carroll, he had Russell Wilson and, got Russell Wilson obviously to win a Super Bowl, and he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league for years. And then then they brought in Geno Smith, and all of a sudden Geno Smith was like, he's a legit starting quarterback. So that's encouraging. But at the same time, the way I look at it is it really all Pete Carroll? And I think that's a valid question because Russell Wilson, albeit he's struggled the last few years, and a lot of people say it's his personality. And you hear from players who played in Seattle for years ended up saying, yeah, Russell Wilson really just kind of did his own thing. He wasn't really part of the guys. Um, you know, Could it have been that Russell Wilson was just that good at that time in his career? And I think that's a valid question. I think you have to actually look at that and go, okay, was that Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson working together, or was that more just Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll just letting him do his thing? I mean, and if you're kind of sitting there going, well, okay, what's the issue though? Well, the issue is that he didn't develop Russell Wilson. If that's the case, if that's the case, he didn't develop Russell Wilson. That was all Russell Wilson. And then we're looking at Geno Smith. Well, I don't think any of us thought Geno Smith was that bad. I think we thought that the New York Jets were that bad. And so when Geno Smith came to Seattle and got basically a second chance, and the game kind of shifted towards what he was doing at that time, where he could, he had the ability to run and all that. And he had come into a league that really didn't know what to do with that type of a quarterback just yet. I mean, we were starting to kind of get into that mode, and of course, the Jets really don't know how to. They didn't know how to develop a quarterback. So, coming to the Seattle Seahawks, where he learned basically what not to do, he comes to the Seahawks and he just follows Russell Wilson's footsteps. Like, oh, I'm just going to do what he did. So, my issue is, can he really develop a quarterback? I think the evidence points to he can, because if you even look at the USC years, well, you had Matt Leinart, and Matt Leinart, for all intents and purposes, was a really good quarterback. Now, when he went into the NFL, he didn't translate, but you can't really put that on Pete Carroll. You can't say, oh, I can't believe he didn't do this or blah blah blah. That's not really on Pete Carroll. But Matt Leinart was a top college football quarterback.
Drew Code Sports Talk is supported by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is your go-to app for tickets, making it super easy to find the best deals. They even rate each ticket deal on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know you're getting your money's worth. And as a special thank you to our listeners, we've got a promo code just for you. Use Drew Code at checkout to get $20 off your first order. That's $20 off your first purchase, whether it's for the game that you've been dying to see or that concert that everybody is talking about. Head over to SeatGeek now, find your perfect seat, and use Drew Code for $20 off your first order. SeatGeek. Get your tickets to the action today.
So Pete Carroll can I believe, develop quarterbacks. I think that is a high probability. I mean, you look at Mark Sanchez. Mark Sanchez, again, was a top college football quarterback. He went into the NFL. Of course, we always make fun of Mark Sanchez for the fumble and blah, blah, blah. But again, you look at what team drafted him. Well, that's the New York Jets. You look at Matt Leinart. He was drafted by the Arizona Cardinals. Well, that's the Cardinals. I mean, the Cardinals were only successful when they had Kurt Warner, who brought them to a Super Bowl. Unfortunately, ended up losing in the Super Bowl to the Pittsburgh Steelers. But you look at that and you go, well, that's not Arizona Cardinals. That's Kurt Warner was really good, and then of course they had Larry Fitzgerald, and that Arizona defense was doing really well that year. But again, you look at the development of the quarterbacks, and he's done. You look at his career, and he's done pretty well for himself. Now, again, most of those quarterbacks have not ended well. So is there something to that, or is that because they left Pete Carroll? And that's the really tough part. What Colin Cowherd likes to say a lot is, when a player leaves a program or a team, what does that team do next year? Like, you got to look at how they looked after that person left. Did that person really make a difference, or is that just the organization? That they're just like a truck. And like, you look at Matt Leinart. When he left, then it was Mark Sanchez. And, they kind of had a couple of losses here and there, but then Mark Sanchez all of a sudden was really, really good, okay? Then you look at when Mark Sanchez left, they did kind of dip a little bit, but then Pete Carroll left. And that's why USC is kind of, ever since Pete Carroll really left, USC has not been the same. So you can argue that. You look at the at Russell Wilson. Ever since he left, the Seahawks really haven't missed a beat. They're still not the same. I mean, they're still kind of trying to find their way, but they're not a terrible team. You look at the Seattle Seahawks as a whole. Ever since Pete Carroll left, they've kind of been pretty much the same. So is that because Pete Carroll left? Is that because there's so many questions? And so for me, with the Raiders hiring Pete Carroll, I understand them. And it does make sense because Pete Carroll was one of the few coaches who is still coaching that beat Tom Brady in a meaningful game. And so I think Tom admires Pete Carroll and the way that Seahawks team really played. And I think that's ultimately why this decision was made. Now, my number one was Ben Johnson. My number two for me was Cliff Kingsbury. My number three was Aaron Glenn. And my number four was Pete Carroll. So I'm okay with this. Aaron Glenn goes to the Jets. Ben Johnson goes to the Bears. Cliff Kingsbury is right there. I would have gone for Cliff Kingsbury. But again, right now, we don't know if Kingsbury is even going to want to leave. Now, I'm sure he would because I think he wants to be a head coach again. And again, a lot of people want to, we could go into the Cliff Kingsbury another day, but ultimately, I think he wants to be another head coach, and I think he deserves another shot. And so that's who I would have gone after. But I do also think that the Raiders feel like we need a guy who's a big-time leader, a guy who's going to be a good motivator. But the main thing that Pete Carroll does that none of the other guys we know can do is he can create a culture. And Tom Brady is a huge, huge advocator for having the right culture on your team. And I think Pete Carroll is one of those guys who's going to get the culture right. Does that mean he's the best coach on the market? No. Does that mean he's going to win a Super Bowl for the Raiders? No, not necessarily. I don't think this move is necessarily for Super Bowls. Of course, you want to win a Super Bowl. And if you have Pete Carroll as your head coach, you have a chance. But I don't think this move was strictly for Super Bowls. What I'm saying is, I believe that this move is not only for a Super Bowl win, but also to create a dynasty, to set up whoever's going to take Pete Carroll's place. Because let's be honest, Pete Carroll is not going to coach forever, obviously. He is an older gentleman, and not saying he's, going to die in the next 2 years or whatever. He's not that old, but he is an older man. I believe he's going to be the oldest coach in the NFL now. But what I'm saying is he's a guy that is going to create a culture, and once he creates that culture, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he is gone and hands it off to someone who is going to continue that culture, and not only continue that culture, but create this dynasty. And I think that's the idea behind this. This is not just, we're trying to get a Super Bowl next year. Of course, that's the goal. But this is bigger than just the Super Bowl. They want to create a sustainable team. They want to create, a team like the Buffalo Bills, like the Kansas City Chiefs right now, like the New England Patriots back in the day. They want to create, or even the Seattle Seahawks. They want to create a team that is going to be years in the hunt for playoff and possibly Super Bowl. And that is the goal. And so, and I feel like and my point is not really coming across because I keep saying, it's not about Super Bowls. It's not just about Super Bowls is what I mean. of course, that is the ultimate goal. That's what you're trying to do. But what I'm also saying is, it's other factors. So for me, if I'm hiring Cliff Kingsbury, we're going to draft a quarterback. We're going to let him develop, and eventually we're going to get there. Where you get Pete Carroll, he's going to set the culture. Probably are going to get a quarterback. He's going to build that quarterback up, and he's going to not only create that quarterback to do the best that he can, but also this Las Vegas Raider team as a whole is going to be viable for years. And that is the ultimate goal. That's what the Raiders have been striving for. Yes, we've been striving for to have a good year, which we haven't had one in a while. But now the Raiders, I think if you're looking at the big picture here, and I'm not trying to get too excited, but I kind of am getting too excited, is if you look at the big picture, I can see that the Raiders could be a really good team for many years. Pete Carroll is a guy who can set that up. Again, if you want to look at examples, USC hasn't been the same since he left. And it's not that he left it to someone. He had to leave it and let it go. But now you look at the Seattle Seahawks. When he left, they were like, "Hey, we're gonna do you justice, man. We're gonna hook you up. We're gonna, who would you hire?" And he set it up for success over in Seattle. And I think that's a big, big factor, and why you don't see a huge drop off with the Seattle Seahawks. That's why, the Seahawks are still a tough team to play. You still have to worry about them, and they're really young. It's not because Pete Carroll left and they're still just, that's just the organization. That's the culture that Pete Carroll created that then translated into whoever got the next head coaching job for the Seattle Seahawks. And so I'm really encouraged by this hire. I wish Pete Carroll, and this is not an ageist thing, but I wish Pete Carroll was a little bit younger, because I would like to see him be the Raiders head coach for a lot of years, kind of like how he was with Seattle. But I just don't think he's going to want to coach for that long anymore, and that's why a 3-year deal makes sense to me. I think that, again, this is a good hire, but I do have some questions. I think there are some valid questions that people can ask, but this makes the most sense if you're trying to create a culture and you're trying to create a dynasty versus, hey, we're going to go for a big swing on one of these young guns who hasn't been a head coach before, or who has, but was part of a not so good organization. I think what this does is this creates an opening for the Raiders to be good for a lot of years. A lot of years. But it's not only done just through the coach. It's done through the draft. It's done through the players that you get. Who's going to buy into the culture? Stuff like that. And it sounds easy. You're like, oh, dude, like, yeah, you just like guys that you vibe with. Sometimes guys that you vibe with, you don't agree with. I'm sure people who are full on Democrats, like Democrat galore, have friends who are maybe MAGA supporters, or MAGA supporters who have like really left leaning friends. It happens. Just because you get along with someone doesn't mean that you're always going to agree on something. And so that's why it's very important. That's why people say the culture has to be very similar, or the player has to be buying all into the culture. Because if you get some guy who's not really going to agree and just is like, I just want to be here for a payday, it's not going to work. So you have to get every player to buy in. And so that's going to be the hard part for Pete Carroll. But he's done it for many years. He can do it again. I fully believe in it. I like Pete Carroll. I can't wait to see how much gum he goes through in Vegas. But I'm excited, man. I'm really, really excited. The only thing I worry about is, the development of players. Can he still do it? Is he still capable? I'm not sure. I really am not sure because, um, towards the end, it wasn't the greatest in Seattle. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the greatest. And so it does give me a little pause, and it is a little worrisome. But if I'm more of an optimistic person, I'm more of a positive person, and I'm going to believe that Pete Carroll is going to be able to do this. So I like the hire, and cannot wait to see what else happens throughout this year. And now I'm ready for the draft. I'm very curious of now what the new regimes, um, what their thought process is, and how they want to go about it and how they want to start building this team. So this is all very exciting. Congratulations, Pete Carroll. Congratulations, Las Vegas Raiders. It's going to be a really, really interesting year. And Pete Carroll is a builder of men, and I'm really excited, man. I really am. So, all right, guys, thank you. This is the Emergency Drew Code podcast. If you haven't listened to it and you just got here, the Las Vegas Raiders have signed Pete Carroll as their new head coach to a 3-year deal. All right, guys, thank you.